Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and folk of all ages, you know what time it is. It is April, and we're already a week in. So let's get down to it and talk about the holidays, holy days, and days of remembrance of our people. And to start off this episode, we actually have a very special learning lesson time. You may have seen bits and pieces of it here or there over the last maybe month, but really starting now in April, you will see a bit of a change to a lot of the names of our holidays. The Witten, Gothar, and the Ausherjargoti have gotten together and actually figured out, well, they kind of just realized that it didn't make a whole lot of sense, the names of some of our holidays that we called them in the modern times. When you have holidays that are named in English and other ones named in German and others named in like Swedish and Icelandic and Old Norse, we needed to come together and actually unify that, make it a singular, cohesive unit. And one of those holidays that I mentioned that was in German this month was Hexanacht. Now, for these holidays, we celebrate them more or less the exact same, all but one of them is the exact same. Let's go through them really quick, go through all 12, and then we'll go into the specifics of our month of April. So in January, we're keeping it as Thorblot. Same as always. In February, it is going to be a bit different. It is Disathing. Disathing. That is a Old Norse version of what you may have heard a word before, Disting. And it also is still incorporating aspects of Charming of the Plow. We're still blessing the plow, honoring Freyr, all of that sort. But there's the added addition of honoring the Disir. And really, there's never a bad time to honor our mothers and our ancestral mothers. And we still bless the plow and all of that. Last month, in March, we celebrated Austra. Now, this is just the Old Norse name for Ostara, Easter, Eostre. Same thing. This month is Nornanótt, which again is simply the Old Norse words for Hexanacht or Witches' Night. Same holiday. Next month is Sumarmal. Sumarmal. May Day is a more modern, contemporary celebration. An older version of that name, Sumarmal. It was actually listed in some of our old lore in the Eddas as a holiday, Sumarmal. Same celebration. Same thing for June is Midsummer. It's just translating it into the Old Norse. We're keeping Sigurblot the same, as well as Freyfaxi. In September is Haustblot, which is Harvestblot. Always, Winter Finding was a harvest festival anyway. It's still a harvest festival. We're still going to be honoring Ur and the start of the hunting season. We'll just call it Haustblot. And for the final 3 months of the year, it's basically just an Old Norse translation of the names we were using more or less. Veternator for Winter Nights, Einherjarblot for Feast of the Einherjar, and Jol for Yule. It's really not that complicated. The biggest changes to name-wise is Disathing, Nornablot, or Nornanótt, and Haustblot, maybe? We'll be going over them every month. As always, you can read them on the Runestone page on the Holy Days. They're also listed every month in the Runestone newsletter that you get emailed to you. Alrighty. So let's go over the specifics for April, shall we? We've already wasted a few minutes of your precious time. In April, we have 2 days of remembrance and our holiday. Our first day of remembrance is on April 9th. coming up in just a couple days for Jarl Hákon Sigurðarson. And we follow that up on the very next day, on the 10th, for our day of remembrance for John Jarl Stubba. And then our holiday, as I said earlier, is Nornanótt. And as always, that will be technically the last day of April on the 30th. It would be followed by Sumarmal on May 1st. But because we know that not everybody can get together for 2 days in a row, and a lot of times if those fall in the week or anything like that, we celebrate and observe the holiday on the third weekend of the month. But if you're able to get together on the 30th and the 31st with your folk, that's awesome. So the third weekend of the month would be the April 19th, which is the day that we're going to observe Nornanótt at the Hofs, etc. Alrighty, let's get down to the nitty-gritty and learn a bit about these holidays and holy days. Born in 937 and passed away 995, Hákon Sigurðarson, also known as Hákon Jarl and Jarl Hákon, gained his title of Jarl in 961, after his father was killed by Harald Greycloak. He was the Jarl of Lade, Trondelag, Hålogaland in Norway. Adam of Bremen claimed that Jarl Hákon was descended from Ivar the Boneless, and Hákon himself claimed to be descended from the Allfather, as he was a devout Asatru. After the death of his father and his elevation to the title of Jarl, he warred with Harald Greycloak for a time, until being forced to flee to Denmark. Once in Denmark, he and Harald Bluetooth managed to defeat and kill Harald Greycloak. After Greycloak's defeat, Bluetooth gave Jarl Hákon fiefs in Denmark. After defeating Greycloak's surviving brothers, Jarl Hákon ruled Norway as one of Bluetooth's vassals. In 973, Hákon went south to Denmark to help Bluetooth fight off Otto II of the Holy Roman Empire. Despite this help, Otto managed to fight off their combined forces, and Germany retained its influence over Denmark. Following this, in 975, Bluetooth convinced Jarl Hákon to accept Christ and be baptized, and to take clergymen with him back to Norway in order to convert his folk. However, when a perfect wind came along for him to return to Norway, he ordered the Christian clergy to stay ashore. He returned to Norway, his loyalty to the Aesir intact. On the face of it, the story may look like a betrayal by Jarl Hákon, but consider the words of the Hávamál. To a friend be a friend, but with an enemy swap lies for lies. Once Bluetooth forced baptism upon Hákon, he had no choice to break his allegiance and leave Bluetooth's Christian clergy behind. 20 years later, in 995, a disagreement erupted between Jarl Hákon and his folk in Trondelag. At the same time, the infamous snake known as Olaf Tryggvason arrived in the area, likely to convert the area to his foreign faith. Jarl Hákon's support from his folk ran out, and he was murdered by his friend and servant Tormund Kark. Kark betrayed his lord in the hopes that Olaf would reward him, but he was decapitated for the crime of betraying his master. Jarl Hákon was a man who helped his allies when called, navigated the politics of Northern Europe with skill, and kept his troth with the Aesir, even when his lord forced him to be bathed in the name of Christ. If not for the treachery of Tormund Kark, he may have stood a chance against Olaf the traitor. On the 9th day of April, we honor both his strength as a ruler and his devotion to build his folk and our gods. Even though it only lasted an extra 20 years, he managed to keep the torch of Trondelag's troth with the Aesir alight. May we all be steadfast in our devotion and dauntless in our piety. Hail, Jarl Hákon Sigurðarson. Hail, the Asatru Folk Assembly. And on the 10th, the very next day, we honor John Jarl Stubba, John Leslie William Jarl, better known as Stubba, was born in England on April 10th of 1918. We know precious little about his family or early life. Most of our knowledge of him comes from his military service and role in the Royal Stuart Society. In the military, he served in the Spanish Civil War, the Indochina War, and in Burma in the 40s and early 50s. He retired from military service in 1954. As far as his role in the Royal Stuart Society, he was elevated to the position of Vice President and was said to be seventh in line for the throne of Great Britain if the Stuart line were ever restored to power. He was so treasured by the society that upon his death, they performed his funeral service. After his time in the military, he discovered Asatru and met John Gibbs Bailey, also known as Hoskuld. Hoskuld was experienced with various early Asatru groups over the previous 30 years, and introduced Jarl to the religious teachings of that time. Throughout the 1960s, the two men stayed in consistent contact and cultivated knowledge on the faith of their ancestors. In 1973, they formed the Committee for the Restoration of the Odinic Rite, the predecessor to the modern Odinic Rite. During these early years of the committee, John Jarl adopted the name Stubba, which he took from a Saxon chief who had ruled in the area now known as Whitechapel. As the Committee of the Odinic Rite started to find its footing, Stubba played an integral role in creating Asatru doctrine with what little knowledge they had at the time. This included helping Hoskuld write the 9 Noble Virtues. Hoskuld had come up with a list of 8, and Stubba added the 9th one. These virtues, along with Alsherigoti Flavel's edition of Victory, are still used by the Asatru folk assembly to this day. Many of our folk, AFA or not, strive to live their lives by these virtues. At Hoskuld's time in Midgardr began to come to a close in the 70s, Stubba began much of the face of the Odinic Rite. He became the first director of their court of Ogothar, leading important efforts in bringing his folk back to the troth with the Aesir. He assisted in the publishing of the Raven Banner, the first Asatru publication in the United Kingdom. Stubba led the court of Gothar until 1989, when he retired from leadership to focus on writings, recording of Asatru music, and research. He wrote and published several books in his lifetime, but perhaps most notably, he wrote a letter to the Australian government requesting information and photographs of Heilige Mother Alexander Rudd Mills. He had nearly completed a manuscript regarding this, but there is no known copy in existence. Stubba passed from Midgardr and joined his ancestors on September 25, 2010. He was given a funeral by the Royal Stuart Society, followed by an Asatru ceremony where he was honored at the famous White Horse Stone, the resting place of Horsa, one of the first Saxon chieftains to set foot in Britannia. Stubba was a warrior, a student of our folk's history, an author, and a pioneer of our ancestral faith. He was part of the tip of the spear, leading the British folk in reforging their loyalty to the Aesir, and the Asatru Folk Assembly will honor him forever. Hail Stubba! Hail the Aesir! Hail the Asatru Folk Assembly! And our holiday for the month, officially on April 30th, with the observant day on the 19th, is Nornanótt. Previously, we referred to this as Hexanótt, of course. When the ground was thawed and the colder weather was beginning to give way, it became necessary to move the cattle from the winter fields to the summer ones. Nornanótt traditionally was a festival celebrating this very thing. The main focus of the holiday was the bonfire. The men would all gather and build the large need fire. They would then walk the cattle through the smoke to bless them before rehoming them for the warm months. Often the men would call on Freyr during Nornanótt, asking for fertility and abundance. While the men were off blessing the cattle, the women gathered together for their own festivities. They had their own bonfires, and it was during this time that the women often burned herbs and practiced their local magic, or seder. As the men called on Freyr, the women would often call on Freya. After the separate celebrations, men and women would come together and continue the festivities. We in the AFA celebrate this day as Nornanótt, instead of any more common Walpurgisnacht. Walpurgisnacht is named such because it's a night before the Christian feast day honoring Saint Walpurga, who was credited with healing and repelling witches. Certainly not something for our folk to celebrate. Men and women celebrating separately and then coming together are one of the main features of Nornanótt, as well as the bonfires. A good way to celebrate the holiday might include the men building the bonfire, while the women practice communal seder. When they are finished, the men and women can join together around the bonfire. The women can throw herbs into the fire, and asking for the blessings of Freyr and Freya. The men, women, and children can each take turns walking through the smoke. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in again today. If you guys have any questions about any of the holidays, the names, or anything like that, don't hesitate to ask any of the folk builders, leadership, Gothar. We're all happy to answer any questions you got. And we'll talk to you next month about Sumarmon, of course, and our Days of Remembrance in May. And I know we're a ways off. I'm not going to plug it too big, but get ready. Midsummer over at Odenshof's coming up in just a couple months. So we'll give you a big plug for it and stuff next month. But if you get frisky to buy some tickets ahead of time, runestone.org/store. Thank you all so much again. And, of course, as always, hail Jarl Hákon, hail Stubba, hail Freyr, hail Freya, hail the Nornir, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA, hail victory. Good night, y'all.